Okay, I trust that they had a wonderful break, holidays, celebration, and all that good stuff. And now we'll pick back up, kind of go back over where we looked at before we left, and then bring everything forward. And to do that, I just picked up an old newspaper. This is from November 20th. And what's interesting, because we are now looking at national ethics, governance, and development. And in reality, we're looking at it the entire time, from the very beginning until now. Because the issue of development is directly tied into governance and a system of ethics, some type of system of ethics that's in place. When we're talking development, we're talking economics. The persons who are primarily concerned, who have a key role within the issue of economic development, the government. Which then brings us to the issue of ethics. Because if there is no system of ethics that is in place, that is culturally grounded, you end up with the big C word, corruption. Where you have people who utilize their positions in government to satisfy themselves financially and friends, family, things of that nature. And this isn't something that's unique to the situation we have here today. You can look back at U.S. history and U.S. government for an extended period of its history up until about 1881. When somebody was elected to office, became president, for example, they replaced everybody in the government, in the bureaucracy. They started removing people out and putting in their people all across the board. Why? Because it made it easy to move their programs. So, and in many instances, when you go back and look at that little history, you see the persons put brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, cousins, best friends, brother-in-law, all these different people would be placed into these various positions. So it was only in the late 1880s that the U.S. began, just because they passed a law and made certain things illegal, didn't mean that it was automatically implemented. It still took another 100 years before they got to the level of corruption that they're at now. So you still have corruption, but it is not defined it as such. It's not defined in that manner. And it's not as blatant. Generally, it's not as blatant as it originally was. It was just originally an option. You just knew. Now they're more sophisticated with it. Because when you go into the West, you look at Germany, you look at the U.S., you look at France, these countries are corrupt. You look at their government is corrupt. They've just gotten to a more sophisticated level of corruption. And the way they do that is by controlling the domain of discourse. You control what's going to be talked about. So that when you look at television, satellite television, whatever, the issue of corruption, they can actually be talking about corruption in Germany, for example, in German government. But if you pay attention to what's done, the image will be when they start talking about corruption. And if you're familiar with journalism, when they get started, they have the lead in and you the background. So when they mention the issue of corruption, all of the images are from Africa. If you pay attention, they start talking corruption, the images are from Africa, and they'll have found countries, authoritarian governments, with the worst leaders, and they'll put that person's face. Then they'll start talking about the corruption in Germany. Now, why did they do that? Because they want to keep within your mindset the idea that when you think corruption, you're supposed to think African leaders. And so they're just more sophisticated at it. Not to mention, their persons still do the same things. Over there, you don't have to go overseas and place money in banks because that's where all the banks are. So if we don't we're dealing with development, we're talking about economics. We're going to have to deal with the government, and then we have to deal with ethics. A system of ethics has to be in place. Otherwise, you will only end up with people who will come into governance positions and will utilize their positions to fatten their pockets. And you've seen that in Walter Rodney. You've seen that in Samir Amin's book. You've seen that in the last book we have, which is Frantz Fanon. They point that out for us. So I brought this newspaper mainly because when we're talking development, we're talking problem solving. We're talking a particular way of thinking. And so there are a couple of stories that jumped out from this old paper that I had laying on the desk. First one is, pregnancies chase 5,000 girls from school yearly. And that doesn't even count the girls who got pregnant before school and then you make it to school. And the second story was, survey unearths graft rot in transport sector. Corruption, stifling economic growth in East African community blocks. Bribes amount to 19% of the value of moved goods. And then they go on. And I could have pulled up any newspaper. I could pull up the newspaper from today. And you're generally going to find some type of a social problem, like if I got the girl pregnancy chase 5,000 girls to school yearly. If you look at the story, they're talking about, they kind of try to get into why the girls are ending up pregnant, and as if we didn't know why they were ending up pregnant. So it says 788 pregnancies chase 5,000 girls to school yearly. Then it says 78 million shillings raised to build girl dorms, and the goal is $2.3 billion. So, they've told you what the problem is, obviously, because it's in the paper, so they're saying that's the problem. Then they turn around and you can see their solution. Well, 78 million shillings, if you build girl dormitories, apparently that's supposed to reduce pregnancy. Then it says over 5,000 secondary school girls drop out every year due to pregnancies. According to the Minister of Education, Minister for Education, Vocational Training, there is an alarming rise in schoolgirl pregnancies, apparently reflecting increased admissions, or understandably, poor learning environment that lacks even the most basic of human needs, shelter. Because the school system here, obviously, is primarily centered around the issue of boarding schools, where you leave home and go away to study, generally. That was how many of you watched BBC last night? Not BBC, but I was looking at Star TV, and they had the BBC, not BBC Africa, but it was BBC African Focus. And they had a particular, about 5 to 10 minute clip about Tanzania, because they were talking about ethnic strife in Africa, and they looked at Sudan, and they looked at Nigeria, and then they came to Tanzania, and they said, the focus of the story was Tanzania, and they were showing that Tanzania was the example. And those of you who came to class before we left, you remember that I said, Tanzania is your example for the rest of the continent on how you can have over 100 different ethnic groups, and everybody can get along and to marry. As a matter of fact, in the story they had brought in a couple of couples, married couples who were married. The man they didn't mention what particular ethnic groups they were. But, they were highlighting that one of the things that you read and they did during the period of Bushama was to build a national identity. And that's what they were focusing on. You have a national identity here. And one of the interviewees mentioned that in Tanzania, one of the unifying goals is language. So they were pointing this out. And anyway, in the story they mentioned that a way for building the national identity was through education. What they did was they emphasized an educational system that was based on boarding schools, whereby you would have different students would be going away from their home region at a certain level of education. Once you got into Form 1, 2, 3, once you got out of primary school, then you start moving away to the boarding school. So my primary school might be, wherever my village is. That might be my primary school be there. And I'll do my primary education there. But then, when it's time for me to move on to the next level, to go away from school, And what they emphasized was that because that was the system here in Tanzania, what occurred was you started having young children from different backgrounds. And so now you're here in this school speaking the same language, and you've got different ethnic backgrounds, but the whole educational system fostered an idea of a national identity. And it didn't, and one of the things they emphasized is that it didn't get rid of the ethnic identity. It just added to the ethnic identity, showing the commonalities. Which is why I brought this particular book here, which was published. It says 20 Years of Tandem Leadership is Toys for Your Mouth. And the interest of this book for this particular thing we're talking about here was the last chapter has to do with Tanzania and national culture. And they were talking about independence. That's the idea of what was being built was the national culture. So, you have the national culture here. Now, another thing that comes from that period was the Arusha Declaration. The Arusha Declaration specifically focused in on governance. You have to remember, and you all know this from secondary education, you already know this, you studied this history, so just a quick review. Remember that from 1961 to 1966, they had a very huge problem of just blatant corruption. It was just massive, because they maintained the same economic system, still a capitalist system, and so you had people who were part of at the time was TANU, and they were a part of this, and they were now in government, they were in these positions, and you have access to all these resources. So people were using their government position, they were using that to open up different businesses, they were purchasing large tracts of land. This is before they rewrote the land law, before land reform. You know, the laws that are in place now were put in place then. And they were addressing governance, because if you were going to develop, you had to address governance. The problem when we look at that period, because all things that are done have problems, was they actually didn't put in place a system of capitalism a socialism or an economic system that was going to benefit the people. You pretty much put in place state capitalism, so you still had issues of corruption, but now because of the leadership code that was contained in the Arusha Declaration, people were being more sophisticated with their corruption. And you will notice that in 1992, when they officially did away with the Arusha Declaration, you will notice one of the first things what begins to happen immediately is that government persons, when they were got rid of the Arusha Declaration and the leadership code, and then they were pushing privatization, which really wasn't privatization, it was just sell-offs. And so it was the persons who were in government positions who started buying up things that were originally put in place. Because remember, under the leadership code, what you had occurring was you were a person in government, you were working for a university. The government provided you with housing and all of these things. You know, they provided government housing. Why? If all of your needs were taken care of, then that was going to reduce the issue of corruption. To a point. And it did to a point. So we can go to Sokoine, for example, and you can see when I went there, and a friend of mine took me there, and we were looking at the faculty housing. Because remember, it's a government institution, they provided housing for the faculty. So all of the needs, housing for not just individual faculty, but for entire family. So anyway, they were addressing the issue of governance, corruption. Because it was big, they put that in place to deal with it. And so now, we're back here full circle, because remember now, beginning in about 1985 and definitely in 1982, there's a switch over to now neoliberal policies. IMF comes in and follow all these policies. So now you have the issue of corruption, which is what the newspaper article is pointing out. In the second piece, where it's talking about the amount of corruption that's occurring, the amount of money that's being lost. Because people are now just, and you've seen it, we all see it here. We see it at each level of society. Even when you go into a shop. When you come into a shop, people look at you and they listen to you to see what they're going to say the price of certain goods are. So, local Tanzania will get one price, Someone from another country get another price. There's no set price on things. They just kind of, start off there. And so then you see that throughout the society, not just at the government. You see it here to Miami, you can see it at any institution where there's a certain degree of corruption that's occurred. Generally, in areas that have to do with money. You get that level of corruption. Now, the reason I mention this pregnancy issue because it's a social problem. A social problem is, and as he pointed out, they were saying poor learning environment, and he also started talking about poverty. Remember, poverty is a hellish situation. But poverty is a symptom of a larger problem. It's a symptom. Because remember, once again, going back to when we were talking about that, during that time, education was state funded. From 66 to roughly 1992, education was state funded. But you had this system of, you take a mayor, whereby individuals were, they were doing some type of work, they were getting some fund for self-reliance. Alright, so now, but you've got the issue of corruption on one hand, and in this story, it's of a particular social issue on the other. It has to be addressed, and they're both tied together. Because they're both tied in with the issue of development, and who's benefiting from the development? Who are the people who are primarily benefiting right now from the, how many years has it been now? 20 years? 25 years? We'll roughly say this. The change from 1992 to 2003, you're talking about practically what? 20, almost 30 years. So, who has benefited from what's occurred? And the issue of national ethics is key to that. In the first topic, what we have here is problem solving. Because I've given you the project on problem solving. Pick some development problem to solve. Pretty simple. In order to do that, we've got to have mathematical precise reasoning. Which brings me to a quote from a lawyer from the United States. And he actually made this quote maybe about roughly 2 hours ago. So I was sitting at the computer and I was reading, and I saw the quote and I told him, I said, ask him if I can use that in class. So his name is he's a minister as well, Reverend Coley. And this is the quote that he mentions. He said, once one loses mathematical momentum, one devolves into situational metaphysics, a state in which abstraction replaces precision, where demonstration is displaced by remonstration, and where technical possibility is tempered by futility, and where development stultifies and dies. Reverend Larry Delano Coleman, also an attorney at law in the United States. So what he's pointing out is that, see, if you're going to engage in problem solving, you've got to deal with mathematical reasoning. Right now, we're at a stage, because of the lack of problem solving, the lack of mathematical precise reasoning. Mathematics forces you to be precise. And because of the lack of that, now we pretty much have people, we don't have any precision in what we're doing. So everything is abstraction. For example, the news article. Their solution to the issue of teenage pregnancies is building female dormitories. Somehow there's a disconnect in that problem and that solution. Because what's really causing, see, when you talk about teenage pregnancy, you're talking about young girls being pregnant, which the article really doesn't get into is who's impregnating the young girls. It says, and the article then goes on to talking about having a marathon to raise money to build it. And then it says last week there were reports from Ambakisye-Okang in Tonga that officials were detaining in regular jails pregnant students, demanding that they reveal the man responsible for the pregnancy. Pregnancy tests are also compulsory and conducted randomly. So, the solution that was put in place really doesn't address the actual problem. It doesn't even address the problem of teenage pregnancy, which you have a breakdown in national ethics when you're talking about teenage pregnancy. Really. When you started looking at, and I was reading another article and they were talking about HIV. And this is from another paper here. And what he was pointing out was that one of the persons in the article made the statement that if they could stop older men from sleeping with younger girls, because the older men would engage in sex with younger girls, and they wouldn't use protection because they were figuring that the girls didn't have anything, blah, blah, blah. And so that was one of the issues. One of the statements that the government official wrote. When you're talking about something like teenage pregnancy, you're talking about young ladies going to universities, never going to class, never show up in class, and yet passing. You're talking about a breakdown in national ethics. Even though you might not, when we think national ethics, we normally are we're thinking government, but you're really talking about a breakdown in national ethics. Because the national ethics, we're talking about the entire society. Right now we have Western ethics. Because you go to the United States, you go to Europe, wherever, and you see the same exact issues. That's a part of the Wazungu culture. That's a part of the culture. The culture breeds that type of ethical basis. An ethical basis of competition. An ethical basis centered in competition. Centered in a theory of individualism. Every person for themselves. These type of things. So when we do a problem solving, we have to be mathematical, we have to be precise. Otherwise, you will go from demonstrating or doing to just remonstrating or talking. So look at your government. Nobody's really, because of the failure here, the lack of this here, you have a lot of remonstration. When you remonstrate, you're talking about it. You're angry or you're sad. You're crying. You're speaking a lot. But you ain't doing that. And there's a Tanzanian proverb that says what? A free man acts, but a slave just talks. He's just doing that. It's like a dog that barks. I was watching a little video clip. And it had a little chihuahua. So little small dogs like yay big, long. Maybe about that tall. And they love to bark. They just bark. So there was a cat sitting at the base of his tail. And so the dog is just barking and barking and barking and barking and barking at a cat now. So then, when the next second in the video, the cat runs up the stairs at the dog and making this weird noise. It doesn't sound like a cat. And the dog turns and runs and jumps up on the top of the couch. And the cat is at the bottom of the couch screaming at the dog. So, that's pretty much what we get when we look at government now. We get a lot of people that do a lot of screaming and hollering and whatnot. But when it really gets down to, because this is not easy. You can look at the papers that I gave you and say, this is not easy. This ain't something you can just do and then, it's all done. This is really challenging when you talk about problem solving. It's supposed to be. Because you're talking about, you got to really now think precisely. You got to really focus in. But when you don't have mathematical reasoning, you're not doing anything. I have a favorite saying I like to say, don't come telling me what to do. Demonstrate it for me. Show me. We don't do the demonstration now. We remonstrate. We talk. We give long, drawn. And matter of fact, someone made a statement critiquing government, and they were saying that you had a lot of people in the government that just want to do studies. We're going to do a feasibility study on the building of a new dormitory. We're going to do a feasibility study on the feasibility of providing funds to female farmers. This is what we do. That's remonstration. That's just a lot of talking. That's a lot of studies. People do. And remember I gave you the paper and I said that paper's like 10 million shillings? Because you do that, they spend millions of shillings to do a study. And then what happens to it? The same thing that happens to your dissertation that you do when you graduate. They sit in the library on the shelf, or they sit in somebody's office. That's what happens to studies. Governments do studies, it gets done, nothing happens. I'm sure, you can go back over the past 50 years across the continent. You can start with the Organization of African Unity, you can move on to the AIDS. They pump out lots of studies. And I don't mean 5 or 10 page studies. I mean 1,000-page studies. How we're going to develop Africa over the next 25 years. Here we are 30 years later. No development. Great study. Matter of fact, I have some on my computer. And I'm like, this is some good stuff. And that's all it was. Some good stuff that somebody wrote, put away. When you engage in mathematical reasoning, you move beyond remonstration and just talking to doing. You move beyond being abstract to you move into precision. Abstraction is necessary because you have to think abstractly. That's where your theories come from. So you got to be abstract. But then you got to get to the concrete. For example, I've been talking, a few weeks ago, we talked about environment and agroforestry. I went and purchased some land out by Kalina, and then I surveyed out the land and everything and whatnot, and then now going from just talking about agroforestry to build a demonstration plot of agroforestry. That's how you do agroforestry. And engage in food self-sufficiency. So that's going beyond just the theory here. Here I give you the theory, and then when I want to show you, hey, this works, see, this time next year, I can say, hey, this works. Because I've done it. It's a demonstration. So you need the theory to come up with the idea, but you're supposed to start with the theory. You got to go to the how-to. You got to actually go do it. Concrete. You don't just draw up a house on a piece of paper. You actually go out and build it. Otherwise, you just got a nice picture. So, you have to have this. Problem solving. And as you've been looking around at whatever problems you want to solve or whatnot, one of the things we got to keep in mind when we're talking problem solving is, and we should have a whole class on this, working on building a whole class, systems theory. How do you think system-wide? But not system-wide the way you've probably seen it in some of the classes when they talk systems. And real quickly, you've got two different things you can do. You can look at the issue of teenage pregnancy. We're talking about education. You can look at the issue of education, and there's something about education you want to change. So you say that the problem of education is sensitive, and you define whatever you say that problem is. All right, then you decide you want to solve this problem. Now, you're going to engage in one of two types of thinking. You're probably going to engage in the first, and which is going to be, you're either going to talk about improving the system, or you're going to talk about designing a whole new system. Most of what you see in government, all of what you see in government, across the continent, is talking about system improvement. How can we make this system better? And this, my friends, is why there's been no real development on the African continent. Because they've been improving a system that was already in place. How can we improve the colonial system? That's pretty much what you've had for the past 50 years. People talking about improving a system. When you say you're going to improve a system, you're accepting certain things about the system. And the author of this book, John B. Van Giggich, he says this. He said, when you say system improvement, you're talking about the problem is defined and the system and component subsystems are identified. The actual states, conditions, and behavior of the system are determined by observation. You are looking inside the system. You're saying when you improve a system, and when you're talking about solving a problem, you're either going to look within the problem to solve the problem. You're going to look inside the system and say, okay, here's how we're going to do it. It goes inside. When you talk systems, on the other hand, systems design, you're saying that the current system is a failure. We need a whole new system, which then means you're going to start thinking abstract. Because you need a new theory. And then, after you've gone from your abstract thinking and put together a new theory, you then move to the concrete. You now go out to demonstrate. So then, those two different ways of looking at a problem. Every problem across the continent has been dealt with from the perspective of system improvement. So, for example, if you go and if you nightly watch BBC Africa, you watch BBC Africa in Focus, you'll notice whenever they're talking about the United Nations, you see the governments talking, they say the Security Council is the problem of the United Nations. We need to expand the Security Council from, I think it's 8 or 9 countries to 15. I know they want to expand it to 15. So, and they feel that that will solve the problem of the Security Council and how it hampers anything that the UN does. They're looking inside the system to solve it. See, system design makes you start thinking about the values of the system, the ethics of the system. And then you begin, when you start looking outside, you look at the system itself, you realize, because then you start looking at who built the system, how the system built, why was the system built. You go to ask things, you go to do what another book I have over there talks about, asking the right questions. How are you going to make that solve? So, problem solving, mathematical, precise reasoning. And then, as I just mentioned, evaluative questioning. You got to ask the type of questions that get to the heart of what you're dealing with. The evaluation type questions. The questions that go beyond the what is and what not. Here are the type of questions we normally ask around here. And you're going to see them in a few weeks when you take a lot of these tests here. You're going to see knowledge and comprehension questions. Questions like, the knowledge questions will be questions like, what do you remember about? How would you define? How would you identify? Describe what happens when. Why did something occur? Why was this that way? Which one, blah, 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 blah. Those are just knowledge questions. And then you'll also see comprehension questions. How would you compare blah? How would you contrast blah? How would you generalize? How would you express? How would you infer? How would you identify? That's the lowest level of thinking. But those aren't the right questions. See, because when you get into problem solving, you get into evaluative questions. Those are your higher order questions. Questions such as, what criteria would you use to assess the current educational system across Africa? How would you determine the facts of the situation? How would you determine whether or not those facts were true? See, evaluative questioning, problem solving takes you directly into doing that. Because now, you're now getting to the heart of the matter. You start to going deep down into the theory that underlies it, and then you look at the results of that theory, and then you judge it. You pass judgment, you critique it. Strengths, weaknesses. Can we keep it? Should we throw it away? You get to looking at the history of that system. So when you're dealing with problem solving, that's what you're getting into. That's what you're addressing. That's what you're dealing with. So, back to the national ethics thing. If you really want to solve corruption in Tanzania, across the rest of Africa, you have to base it in African culture. Because right now, you're based in European culture. And remember, these are just government systems that were formerly colonial systems that were just taken over by Africans. They didn't change the system. Very seldom did they change the system. One country did they actually go about changing the system. That was here. This was the only country that had a leadership code that they were enforcing. The rest of the countries didn't have that. But the rest of them, they didn't even attempt to change it. And here, beginning in 1992, they went back to the old system. They said, we have new realities. One ambassador here, he wrote a book, Confronting New Realities. And he was saying why it was necessary for the change from Ujamaa to neoliberalist policy. And the problem is, you have to not know history to accept his whole premise, his whole thesis. Because if you know history, it's like this ain't a new reality. You were driving one way, then you turned off because you say that way wasn't going where you wanted to go. Then you spent from 66 to 1992 going this way. And then somebody else decided, hey, we want to go back in the other direction again. That's not a new reality. You got the same economic policies now that you had then. The same problems. The reason that land reform was begun in the early 60s was because of the problems that you now read about in the newspapers dealing with land in Tanzania now. Where I was watching news a couple of days ago, and there was a women's conference here, and they were talking about the fact that you had companies coming in, buying up large plots of land in villages, moving the people off the land, and then the companies are gone. Government officials, because they got, corruption, that's pocket fat. They got paid a lot of money to sell off the land, and then the businesses aren't doing anything with it. And so, you got all these issues. Those are the exact same issues from then. You got a quote from Rodney back in 1954, 1955. He said, if you allow foreigners to come in and purchase land, pretty soon you will have government officials and foreigners owning all the land in Tanzania, and the people will be landless. Which means the people will be dying because the basis of life in Tanzania is the land. Literally. And that's exactly what you have going on. That's why you've had certain persons who come into government try to push their want to do land reform, open up land. Yeah, it was set up here where foreigners could not buy. When I say foreigners, we're talking about Wazulu, because that's exactly what the law was in place addressing. Because during this whole same time, you had black people like me who were coming out of the West who were being invited here. But Wazulu, they were like, no. Because they understood. And now, the problem that Maldevelopment was talking about in 54 that they wrote into law in the 60s is the exact issue you're dealing with now. But if you don't know history, you don't know that. You understand that corruption? Walter Rodney points out for all of us that corruption is a part of Western culture. It's natural to it. You take the culture, you take the corruption. People steal from government. Over there, they don't call it stealing. They call it embezzlement. It's a fancy term. Embezzlement. Now, if I go into a bank and rob a bank in America, they don't call that embezzlement. They call that armed robbery. But if somebody at the bank steals from the bank, steals more money than I stole, robbing it, they call that embezzlement. What's the difference? But you get locked up for 30, 40 years for armed robbery. But embezzlement, you get 2, 3 years. You get to go home on the weekend. Me, I got to get beat, raped, everything else. I'm tossed into prison in the worst parts of the prison. Because that's an issue in American prisons. Prison rape, that's a big issue. I'm scared. Good. It's a big problem. So, corruption is a part of the culture. And they even talk, if you watch the BBC, they talk about Western corruption every day. It's some part of corruption. They do. So, if you want to, it has to be based in African culture. In the book, the book that we're dealing with now, Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, Jean-Paul Sartre, a French philosopher, in the introduction on page 7, he kicks off and he talks about the fact that when Europeans colonized the world, they divided the world between human beings, so everybody in Europe, and white people in America, and natives. Everywhere else in the world was a native. And they created this whole thing. Then it tells you they put in place an educational system. And then they went out and they found the smartest and the brightest adolescents. And they took them and gave them a Western education and prepared them to run the government, the bureaucratic position, clerks, and things of that nature. This is what he tells you in the book. And then Fanon tells you, he said, look, it's time out for mimicking Europe. Now that is what Fanon is telling you in 1961. Here we are in 2012, and once again, we've got a number of people in the government who are mimicking Europe. President Zuma in South Africa just pointed that out to South Africans. And he was talking about it at the cultural level. He was talking about it at the base cultural level. He's telling people, it's like, look, I don't care how often, he just said this 2 days ago. He said, I don't care how long you go out straightening your hair and bleaching your skin, you will never be white. That was the whole basis of his point. He said you can go out and dress all skimpily and nasty like people do. You see people in the West, they're going out to church, and I used to go to church in the West, and you see the women come to church with skirts way up here. And then they got the cleavage cut way down. Go to church, man. Western culture. I just saw, I can't remember the comic name, he's from Nigeria. He did a whole skit. He had a whole part of his act focusing in on, he was pointing out what has happened to fashion in Africa. The people now taking Western fashion, they just see it in the West, they just come out and just put all this stuff, it's just all kind of just horrible. It's really horrible. You're just showing everybody, every day you got it. So, and Zuma was pointing out that when you take that Western culture, he's like, look, that's not going to make you white. So, it's a part of the culture for these problems that we're seeing. So, anyway, and that's the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is a cultural issue. Like the Maulana Karinga says, the focus is the culture war. Culture is the key. You change the culture, and that is what they were doing during Uzi March, why there was the big focus on developing a national culture. Why they published so many books on that subject. Why they put so many programs into place. That was the point of it. To have a national culture. And so here they're talking about developing a national dress. I was reading a paper a few months ago and they were talking about those issues. But that's the heart of the issue. When you start talking about national justice, governance, and development, you're talking about culture. And you're talking about if the culture is an African culture, then you're going to have a certain particular ethic. Traditional African cultural ethic. A respect between men and women. A respect for family. A respect for the elders. You don't have that in the U.S. Remember I told you a couple weeks ago. People get up, throw them in the over fund. Nowadays, in the U.S., people have babies and they got to go back to work. They have daycare centers. Now, daycare centers, beginning of life. Old folks home, end of life in the West. They have something in common. People who work there generally abuse the people in there. So you get stories out of Western media where you have daycare centers where they're molesting children, abusing, all kind of foolishness. And you find the same thing on the other end. That's Western culture, people. This ain't just happened, this didn't just start yesterday. When you look at Western cultural history, you see that's always been there. And that is the heart of the issue in national justice and governance. So when you're dealing with problem solving, that's why I mentioned in there unique solutions. Which means you gotta think. You gotta be abstract. Then you gotta come up with something concrete that can be done. Because you're mastering a skill. The skill you're supposed to leave for the development studies is not having read a bunch of junk. The skill is solving problems. Because if you don't solve the problems of the country and the continent, who will? Do you really think the Europeans are going to? They just were talking about it on the news last night. Some countries, I forget, Mozambique. They were talking about Mozambique and they were mentioning, Mozambique is another one of the countries that found massive deposits of natural resources and gas, all of these things. And so they were pointing out, I think they mentioned Mozambique and they mentioned another country, I think it was Angola, and people were saying, we don't know what happened to it. We know money's been spent, but we don't know where it went. We know money's being made, we don't know who's getting it. A lot of different countries. That would be the problem you would face. So you got to lead with a problem-solving skill. And the best way to get it is to do it. Are there any questions? If not, I'll see you next Tuesday.